is our mission is responsible AI. We love that as a product leader, you are out there kind of getting some messaging out on that, been focused on it. And honestly, from our perspective, that's still rare in the market, right? We're still early in this generative AI wave. A lot of product and CTO leaders have not gotten there yet from responsible AI. It's more about how fast can you move. So honestly, it was refreshing to see your perspective come out, and wanted to just follow up and have a conversation on that. What I would love to understand, you guys have had a ton of success at Gong. You've had a ton of personal success, and usually that's based on a foundation of principles of kind of how you approach your job, your role, et cetera. So I'm very curious from your perspective, why the focus on AI governance so early for you, responsible AI so earlier for you? Why was this a topic you chose to focus on at this stage?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, AI is not new to Gong, right? We've been doing AI for, before GPT, the three letters came together. So it was like back from 2016, we started, I think our first speech to text model was back in 2017, maybe even 16. We've been sort of like part of the story founding Gong was we believed at the time that, time is good for AI to kind of kick in. The gap, of course, we solved is like, sales revenue leaders find it hard to understand what's going on. The idea was information sits in people's heads, and kind of AI doesn't yet work in extracting information from people's heads.
Right. Yeah.
So we're like, rather than do this, we're going to collect the information, apply AI, and kind of give them the various kind of guidance, insights, and automation that they're looking for. Obviously, when we started 2016, it was early, but even then we started with saying, hey, first thing, you got to do speech to text, right? Otherwise, there's no AI, natural language processing you can do. And then all sorts of NLP technologies, even before GPT, topic understanding, action items, but whatnot. So I think as an early pioneer in this industry, the question of, how do you do AI right has been there from day one. So it's not new to us because of GPT, right? So that's maybe one. And now the second thing is probably comes to mind is, we have operating principles in the company. And the first one is raving fans. So the idea you want to make customers very happy meaning impact, whatever you want to call it. Part of it is providing value or product, right, in a way that is systematically brings value and making it easy for the customer. Making it easy for the customer means they don't need to worry about, how the sausage is being made.
Yeah, right.
Which means we have to deal with things like security, privacy, governance, regulation, all of these things, not just with respect to AI. So Gong started with recording conversations. So what does it mean from a GDPR perspective? How do I need to obtain consent? Do I not need to obtain consent?
Right.
What does it mean right to be forgotten? All of these things. So from very early on, it was clear to us that the idea is like you make it easy for the revenue leader because we take care of all of the plumbing. So as we overlaid AI, I think the approach has been the same. It's been like when we bring AI to the table, it's not just like here is a piece of technology. It actually comes with, hey, we worry about the accuracy. We worry about whatever. If there is something to worry about, things like bias. If there's things to worry about, where this data is coming from, what is the data trained on? How is your data being used, et cetera, et cetera. Just making it idiot-proof. Nowadays, when we have very large enterprise customers, it's also part of their review process. But in all honesty, 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, I don't think they even knew to ask the right question. So now they do better. And now it's like, hey, we're ready. Here's what you asked for. We're trying to be ahead of this. Sometimes the customer is going to come back like, hey, this question, which we're like, hey, you're ahead of us. But very often we're going to be ahead of the curve. So I'll stop here because I've been rambling for like 5 minutes.
And that makes sense. Especially you're seeing that with the EU AI Act. They're building the foundation of that off of GDPR. You're going to see the same in California with CCPA and others. So it makes sense to see that coming, right? Just like we did with data privacy. I'm curious. So that's a great internal ethos. How'd you guys end up focusing on that as something you wanted to kind of project out, like to start to write the articles to get ahead of as a product leader in this space? Was it something you guys put some thought into there?
I don't know. There's anything like in general, we try to publicize information that we think people are going to care about. If we feel like there's something we've done, we've had some experience with, and then some people might be interested. If we have the bandwidth, it's not always we have the bandwidth. So Hannah here in this team is like helping write stuff, and we've had like other people helping write. But it's like, do we have the right knowledge or maybe opinion? Or even like like part knowledge, right? And this is going to be interesting for some readers. Do we feel there's learning here? I mean, we enjoy other people sharing information. We try to do the same. Of course, there's like a brand and publicity element to this,
Yeah.
but it's always like, also being part of a community. Gong tends to be pretty public in terms of like I mean, we had Gong Labs from day one, which is like, let's publicize how you should be thinking about your sales organization. So we're trying to be pretty open.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think from our perspective, we're pushing it because I think responsible AI is going to allow us to drive the acceleration of generative AI faster, and hopefully also avoid your Cambridge Analytica moment in this space or something like that, where you can see the potential for that slowing everything down, and regulation moving in an area probably where it's detrimental versus helpful. And hopefully, if we can kind of get that word out and educate, it makes everyone better. Right.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think regulation, if it's done right, it's a good thing. Obviously, sometimes regulation is being done wrong, but I think, look, I'm probably one of the few people in the world that actually read GDPR cover to cover. And people came back to me, it was like, oh, this is horrible. And I basically told them, look, I read it end to end, actually it makes total sense. It's
Yeah.
how you implement it. You make it, if you sort of make it into what it's not, then you're basically, screwed.
Yeah.
But if you kind of go through the guiding principles, and I think the sort of the EU AI Act is kind of along the same lines. It's like, it makes sense, right? If you want to, I don't know, if it's the AI that's going to stop your, your sort of like heart from, I don't know, whatever, some medical stuff, then there
Yeah.
has to be some controls around it versus, oh, sorry,
Yeah.
you just died
Exactly.
because somebody didn't do the right, checks and balances when creating this AI based, I don't know, heart monitoring thing. So to me, it totally makes sense. You just need to make it like sensible and start with the right principles.
Well, and yeah, I think I'm probably the only person who's read NIST AI RMF
Yeah.
end to end as well. So I'm curious on that side. So from a framework perspective or regulatory perspective, where are you guys focused as thinking about from a product what you need to adhere to, both whether it's regulatory or responsible principles around transparency or accountability? Where are you guys focused in this area of responsible AI governance right now?
As you know, it's a start, right? So also for
Yeah.
us, it's a start. Like this is not, we're not gonna like
Yeah.
come up with our own standards in a way. So we are following, the industry framework. You kind of mentioned this, the IRMF, BSI,
Yeah.
AI. I mean, all of the sort of the common frameworks. Internally, we kind of have our own policies. To be honest, I'm not even like in the detail of every single policy that we have. We have like already like a GRC kind of team that's handling this. But there's kind of AI governance council. That one I'm actually personally leading.
Yeah.
But the idea is like at least puts the right controls so that you have a way to sort of systematically go and we have over 40 different AI models. So
Yeah.
which ones have the more which ones need to be thoroughly reviewed, which ones are like, look, this is not like a real risk to anybody because they're so low in the stack that they're not going to make impact. So maybe it's less. Which ones are actually, if you give recommendations,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
Exactly.
there's about much bigger bias risk. So I think all of these need to be discussed. Thankfully, Gong does not make like life and death recommendation. It doesn't give you like going back to the kind of EU stuff. It doesn't give you a higher or no higher recommendation. So
Right.
we're less susceptible to kind of maybe high risk type of models, but at the same time, the ones we do, we want to make sure that we do the right way.
Right. And I'm curious about that from because a lot of the partners we work with, they're struggling right now with impact analysis, right, of their AI projects, both upside, where you can use traditional models, but then the downside risk components of it that are fairly unique. And you're right, you're not in a highly regulated side or a high risk side like HR and hiring decisions. But how do you think about the risk impact of a project? Like, how are you guys looking at it, discussing it, and who's involved in those discussions right now with you on your side?
So this is I mean, I mentioned kind of the governance council. So obviously, product, legal, R&D, information security, AI teams,
Yeah.
um, um, sometimes even revenue, CRO. In most cases within the AI team, there's the sort of the AI lead and sometimes more like kind of appointed like governance stewards and whatnot.
Yeah.
It's a whole team.
Yeah.
Um, but the depth is obviously going to depend, depends on obviously the roles and responsibility are different, but then it's
Yeah.
also like, do you take a third party? Do you do it in-house? Do you,
Yeah.
do you document this at what depth and these kind of things?
Yeah. Well, and that's curious. I'm curious on that one. So in the article you guys wrote, you talked about documentation. Can you speak about that a little more? Like, how are you guys looking at documentation of what you're doing, making sure that there's at least transparency in the models and what you're building? Can you talk about that approach?
Yeah, there's internal and external documentation. So I don't think like we as transparent as we are, you're not going to find it online,
Sure. Yeah.
what we do. I mean, this is like obviously there's trade secrets there, but
Yeah.
we do have customers, big Fortune 100 customers that are going to
Yeah.
ask us to see certain things, or even could be worse, could be asking us to sort of make sure that fill in their documentation practices, which is
Yeah.
even harder, of course. Um, so the idea is that if you have AI around a certain things, you want to make sure you capture the key elements of it. What is the business goal that you're solving for?
Mhm.
What's the systematically, like what's the if it's like again, it's assuming it's not off the shelf, then it's like, how
Yeah.
do you build it? What data do you use? There's a whole layer that is not even part of this. It's more of like the data governance,
Yeah.
GDPR, the right to be forgotten. Um,
Yeah.
again, you get data erasure, customers leave you, whatnot. Um, so, um, and then the sort of the in general, you also want to have collect some information around model accuracies, potential biases if there are any. I think once you have this framework in place, it's a little bit easier to sort of go back and say, are there any additional factors that are like, risk or as you said, impact? Does it if we roll this out to production, is it what are the product areas that it touches? What are the potential uses of it? Since we control both the AI and the application,
Yeah.
we kind of control the environment. So like even, like we don't normally see, we don't open the AI models to the public. So it's not like we're going to open an AI, somebody's going to misuse it. It's we have to worry within our own product that, the AI model is being presented in a way that makes sense. Sometimes it's a combination of even like the right language that you basically tell the
Yeah.
customer, hey, this is an AI recommended item. Like I'll give you an example, right? If we write an email from somebody, we wouldn't send it automatically. It was like, okay, AI generated this. Why don't you go ahead and just edit it before you send? So this could be something that's, this is low risk. It's an email.
Yeah.
Somebody has to review it. The customer has to review it, and you sort of take it from there. So,
And I'm curious on that as a product leader. Are you more cautious with what you roll into production that has AI outputs at this point? Are you testing more in beta? Do you approach it any differently than anything else you've been doing?
it's a good question. I want to maybe compare it in my head. So first of all, we do quite. So maybe I'll think out loud here. So we
Yeah.
are a data-driven company from day one. So in a way, when we provided recommendations in 2016, which basically says, you talk too much on the call.
Yeah.
They didn't call it AI at the time,
Yeah.
but it was essentially AI, right? So I think we do pretty rigorous testing and sort of gradual rollout for any kind of data-driven stuff because we don't want to give ridiculous recommendations or guidance or even just show ridiculous information, just respect of our customers' kind of business processes and whatnot.
Yeah.
Um, I would probably say that especially with advent of generative AI,
Yeah.
and there is more need to sort of tame the beast
Yeah.
um, because of multiple reasons. First of all, it's almost impossible to quantify the accuracy of the data because obviously text is not something you quantify, right? Is this good or bad? I don't know.
Yeah.
And there is this sort of infamous idea of hallucinations, which is also hard to sort of put controls over. Um, and then also third-party systems that tend to kind of misbehave more than maybe homegrown systems in the first place. So there's definitely more levels of control you want to and cautious you want to caution that we put around outputs of those generative AI components in most
Yeah.
cases. Right?
Yeah. And the hard thing, so yeah, the hard thing is each output is a little unique in this situation, right? You can't predict, it's predicting on its side, each token. It's hard to predict what that will lead to in every instance. Yeah, that's the hard part. And yeah, I was head of product at Cision and some other places, and we did a lot of ML, NLP work, but at least it was more predictive of what was going to happen versus what it is today. And you hopefully you put those guardrails in place to make some assessment of where it's going to go.
Exactly, exactly. I think traditional ML models where you had full control over, there wasn't this, people call it LLM these days, but eventually pre-training. When
Yeah.
there wasn't any pre-training, you train it on your own data. You know that at least the knowledge that the model has is confined to the data set you provide. It's going to be within reasons. Once you sort of do some sort of pre-training, the system
Yeah.
has learned another data that you don't have control over.
Yeah.
And there's always a risk that some output is going to be, affected by that. Of course, generative, it could be generated and just shows up in some text. pretty
Yeah.
crazy. Obviously images, we don't do images, but it could be done for images. But yeah, so I don't think the industry is like really kind of figured out how to handle this. And you know, we're all like learning this.
Yeah, and how are you guys thinking about, this is where we've had a lot of discussions, especially with highly regulated industries, about model security. Someone injecting something into your data that then produces different outputs. Have you guys really had to kind of circle wagons on that a little bit, and how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's super actually, what are like injection and other things I think are actually super important in my mind. In our case, in most cases, what we do is we the Gong is not like an AI toolkit. It's basically an end-to-end application salespeople, revenue leaders use day to day. So we control the end-to-end experience. So there isn't almost no place where a user can actually type in a prompt or type in input. We take like a conversation you had, and then
Yeah,
we'd kind of create the right prompts and mechanism to do this. So as part of the process, we put like different types of safeguards that around kind of what are the inputs that could get in the system, etc. There's probably one or two places where we give people a little bit more liberty, and then
yeah,
we put a lot of guardrails around. I'll give you an example. We provide like an interface to ask a question about a call, right?
right.
What did the customer say? Could you ask, did the salesperson do a good job? You could. Do we want to answer this question? It's a question, right? Do we want to answer it? So we put a lot of guardrails around those particular areas to make sure that the system is not being abused. And we would certainly not permit, because we control the application again, we would not permit building workflows of this like garbage
Yeah,
up there,
I
or
mean,
even like have one user created for another user, that where we would like, if you ask a question you get a dumb answer, that's better
mhm,
than you ask a dumb question and everybody else in the organization suddenly getting like inappropriate responses. So
fine.
there's
Okay.
guardrails around this.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. And then when you guys think about AI, how do you prioritize? I asked about impact analysis, but how are you guys thinking about how to prioritize things as you move forward as an organization?
Yeah. Well, we don't prioritize AI separately from other things. At the end of the day, it's like one big product. So whether we kind of show you a big bubble that tells you if your deal is at risk,
Yeah,
or we do some NLP magic, and it's all the same. In general, I think the way I view the industry is like AI. If I had to sort of summarize AI in one word,
yeah,
it would be efficiency for B2B organizations. Gong sells to B2B organizations, to sort of businesses. In the B2B world, it's all about efficiency. So the press is obviously going to say lots of things, but in the end of the day, if a business buys AI-driven software, I think in most, actually software in general, but
yeah,
certainly AI software is like, how do you drive more efficiency? So if people buy Gong for the revenue industry, they would expect, sellers to be more efficient, to make better decision making, operations to run smoother, whatever it is that benefits of, sort of all of these kind of good things. So the way we prioritize is say, hey, what type of tool, be it a product tool, a data tool, or an AI tool, is going to drive efficiency. So I mentioned before, if you write somebody if we write an email for them, and now it replaces 35 minutes of work, which we can measure, with 5 minutes of editing, we've just saved 30 minutes. That's pretty good.
yeah,
If we flag to somebody, hey, the deal is at risk because
yeah.
of all the things happen, just like, oh, I can save the deal and I can basically, I don't know, reduce churn from, I don't know, increase win rates from 27%, 29%. That's a big efficiency lift. So we try to measure what you expect the efficiency gain to be.
Yeah.
You can't know upfront because it depends also on the data and the business, whatnot, but that's the main deciding factor.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm curious, just this is a little outside that bounds, but I'm just curious on your side. Like we've seen a lot of sales folks really love AI from a perspective of it makes them more efficient, right? It gets rid of all the crap work they have to do in the day that they never like doing anyway. They get to focus on relationships and sales. So you can see where the efficiency gains are going to come there. But when we talk to C-suites, you can also see them thinking about the idea of virtual salespeople as well through AI. Do you guys have thoughts on that? How sales leaders should approach that? I'm always curious from a perspective of how you're thinking about efficiency and how something like that might factor in.
Yeah. Uh,
Yeah,
we oftentimes equate ourselves to like self-driving cars. So
yeah,
there's level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I think in many ways AI for sales like level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I
yeah,
remember 10 years ago, people said, in 5 years, autonomous cars is going to be a thing, and 10 years has
yeah.
passed, and people are still saying 5 years.
Well, that was Elon
Um,
from the start. So
what's that?
that was Elon from the start.
Yeah. So like I think there is a long way between AI like today and AI actually being able to automate salespeople, but also I don't think it's the right goal. I would generally think about augmented, like people use the term copilot now, but basically
Yeah,
augmented AI, which
yeah,
basically says, hey, I'm going to make somebody who's able to do X task, they can do 2X task. But I think what's probably more fascinating in the revenue profession is not only am I doubling your throughput, even at the end of the day, I'm actually taking out stuff you don't want to do. So like supposedly sellers want to have conversation with customers. We're not taking that away.
yeah,
What I don't want to do is take notes and update CRM and
yeah,
even like do the sort of the laborious task of drafting the emails. They want to control what is being said, but not like
yeah,
kind of go like sort of like a wordsmith it. So the idea is taking as much as possible out of their time, but also the boring, mundane task, which software does much better because it doesn't go to sleep. It works 24 hours a day, blah, blah. So 77%, Forrester says 77% of sellers' time is spent on doing non-selling activities.
yeah.
So there's a lot to be
Exactly.
automated, right?
Well, and that's the fascinating thing. That's where we've seen great positive feedback from sellers is the idea that you can be a great seller, you can be great at relationships, but it's not like all those people are also great at writing content or writing emails. And so if you can give them a tool that makes them great at doing those things and takes it off their plate, it makes them better at everything else they do. All right.
Yeah,
That,
and I think the nice thing about AI, people underestimate. I think there's probably one thing that I would point out as underestimating is um, I'll talk about revenue, but I think it goes beyond revenue. Is you ask people to sort of like summarize and put data in a CRM in the case of revenue and whatnot, and then they don't do this, but even if they were, you could get some answers. But I think they underestimate the fact that AI and software in general, you can also go back retroactively in time. So as long as you collect the right data,
yeah.
you can always go back in time and ask questions you never had access to. So even if you ask a rep to say, who did you compete with, they're going to write it down. And months later, we also want to know what was the use case. And if you didn't ask them to do this, you can't do this. But if
Yeah.
you've collected the right data and you have the right AI, you can always go back. It might be expensive
Yeah.
for Gong or for our customers, right? But you have to go back and like, what was the trend in the last 3 months, which is completely impossible without,
Yeah.
kind of automation, data, and AI on top of it. So.
Well, yeah. And especially, and the hardest thing in sales is the transitions handoffs between salespeople.
Oh my God,
So,
yeah.
so you can cross that Rubicon basically with this. So, hey, I know we've only got a few minutes left. Big question I had at the end was, so you guys have an ethos at Gong. You guys have been successful with that. You're applying it with generative AI alongside everything else you're doing. But externalizing this a little bit, there's a lot of product leaders who really are getting their hands around this. They might not be as advanced as you guys are. What advice would you give them if they, as a product leader, thinking about how they should, update their approach and integrate things like responsible AI into what they're doing? What's critical in your mind for others to be thinking about right now? Right.
It's a good question. I think what I would be worried if I were less into AI is, first of all, it's even before responsible is first of all trying to figure out what's the real versus what the press says. Because if the press had it say, GPT is going to make you coffee and
Yeah.
do massages in the morning and whatnot, I think it's like, yes, all of due respect, first of all, understand what is real versus, because otherwise you're going to be investing in all
Yeah.
lots of, excuse my French here, crap that's not going to make it into a real thing. I think the other thing is you sort of, if you make the right bets or the right movements, is obviously iterate, which is all of us do in the new software world, just like try it out a little bit and
Yeah.
learn, try and iterate. And I think if you eventually, once you decide you're actually going for something, and that's where the responsible part comes in, just like do it well
Hmm.
and think through the stuff. Because if you do it not well and you just like check the box for I have AI right now,
Yeah.
I think yes, 2023 you can probably get away with it for a few months.
Mm.
But as customers become educated and buyers become educated, this is not going to cut it.
That's fair. And then last question on that then. So a little more fun one. What are you excited about on Gen AI? Like like the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months, what are you really excited about in this space?
I am more excited about its applicability to our domain, less about the core technology. The core technology actually has been around for, that's publicized more now, but I think it's like amazing how much you can actually go and do stuff and automate and create more efficiencies for sellers.
Yeah.
Actually, maybe the one thing we haven't done so much in the past, and this is going to be coming up in our stuff, is how much can it accelerate decision making? So just being able to take a lot of information and go to the decision maker and say, here's a few pieces of data that using AI and and generative AI, not just like suddenly you can make decisions based on a lot of data.
Yeah.
Something you could not have done before. It was very hard in the beginning, right? You had to sort of like sift for data. Now there's
Yeah.
new AI capabilities around decision support, so to speak. So I think that's a new frontier for us, at least.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think we're excited about those things too. We can easily see on our side a lot of efficiencies. And then especially as you get to basically minimal cost levels, you're going to see innovation take off. All the things that were too costly to do at scale, you can now think and dream about that you never could before. And that's going to get really interesting in the next 12 months for a lot of companies. But Elan, I really appreciate your time today. I really appreciate your insights. Hopefully this is something others can take something away from, but it's a fast moving space. I imagine everything we've talked about is probably out of date in 6 months.
Probably, yeah.
But probably hopefully in good ways. But appreciate the time again, and thank you very much.